Hey guys, we're back again looking at another very large trumpeter kit with their 1/32nd scale F-8J Crusader. Now, as you can tell from the image on screen, this is a big one, as I can't even fit it fully into frame without putting the camera way far back. So let's open her on up and take a look. Set these aside for a second. Alright, right away, you can already get a good sense of just how utterly massive this kit is. Again, using my hand for scale, I mean, this is no small kit at all. Surface detailing, I'm happy with. No, it's more than deep enough, and very nicely rendered. Will look very good with a little bit of a panel wash to it. Similarly, a lot of the details for the various component bays, landing gear, all are very nice. Now, I do like that they've given you two options here for the control panel in that, and hopefully this will focus and show up. Sorry, this is slow mode arcade just because of the size. You're given either an option to go with a decal or the paint the raised details. That I like. It's always good to have options. Cockpit detail is acceptable for here in the cockpit tub, as well as along the rest of the various parts here. Similarly here with the side panels as well. Now, where this kit has some fairly major problems is the ejector pinning. And it's especially bad here in the air inlet. Hopefully this is showing up properly on camera. It's bad, to say the least. Now, here on the fuselage halves, you can probably get away with not having to do too much cleanup, but here on these inlets, it's going to be a bear just by the amount of it and just how pronounced it is. Also, in this particular half of the air inlet has a rough texture that almost seems like it's miscast somehow. You also have a couple other parts here that have particularly egregious ejector pin marks, so be aware of that. And just for the record, that carries on throughout, so I'm probably going to skip over it moving forward. Now, one thing this kit does have is a full engine. You build up the entirety of the engine, from compressor to burner. So that is a nice thing to have if you want to potentially display it with the engine by itself. I would say it's debatable if you would need to fully build it, unless you want to. But it's a nice option to have, and it's not too terrible in its execution. Again, just do have some problems. Obviously, getting everything buttoned up is probably going to take some effort just to make sure everything's properly aligned, and you'll see why in a little minute. Continuing on, we've got gear bay doors as well as our air brake, a few other odds and end parts. Overall, they're acceptably detailed. No real complaints. Continuing on, we've got some more build-up parts for the engine, as well as our exhaust, which thankfully, in comparison to the one we saw on the last Trumpeter kit, is a little more detailed on the inner section. Hopefully this is showing up on camera. But could be a little better, but is, again, an improvement. Nonetheless, again, a lot of components are going into building up that engine. Moving on, we now have got our main gear as well as some of the air-to-air weapons, our ejection seat, and a few other odds and end parts. Again, nothing too out there that one would expect. You do get a full gun bay on both sides of the aircraft, which is nice, and we also get wing fold mechanism. We'll get a better idea on that once we look in the instruction manual to see how that's accomplished. Continuing, we've got some of the various bobs and bits, our 20mm cannons, and our mains and second or in nose gear. Thankfully, it's done in plastic, not in rubber again like the last one. So that is a marked improvement there. If for no other reason that you don't have to worry about the thing melting on you. Next, we've got our two elevators, which thankfully are single-piece assemblies, which, again, similar surface detail to the fuselage, or slats, and ailerons. Overall, I'm quite happy here. I'm going to do our clear parts next, only because they're in this particular slot. Again, they're satisfactory. No real surprises, nothing egregious. Should drop in without issue. Now, opening this little box up, we've got our canopy and windscreen. I'm going to leave them here just to keep them protected. Much the same as the one we looked at last time. Nicely raised detail to mask off. No complaints. It's clear and will more than adequately do the job. Now, moving on, we've got our two main wing halves. Again, sense of scale. And you can also now more clearly see that we do have the wing folds pre-cut out. That will definitely make life a little easier should you decide to do it with the wings up. And a couple other covers for some of the various components that you can potentially pose as being open. Continuing on, we've got our two sets of wingtips at the wing fold, a few other odds and ends, underwing pylons, and our flaps. Now, the flaps are unfortunately done as two-piece assemblies. Would have been nice had they done it as a single piece. Then, lastly, we've got some air-to-ground munitions, two different an air-to-ground missile, GBU-15, and a Shrike. Overall, by themselves, they're not bad examples. No real complaints. You may go with a resin aftermarket option here just to potentially make some of the cleanup a little easier, but I would say just out of the box, these are more than sufficient. And I would even go a step further and say it's more than worth to probably hang on to them just for added spares. So give me a second to get everything back in the box, and we'll take a look at the photo etch. Okay, when I mentioned before that it comes with a full engine, how they've chosen to do this is by having the compressor blades as photo etch. Now, this is an interesting way to potentially render this that I've not seen before. Now, it does mean getting this thing assembled is going to be a bit of a bear. I do think this might be a little bit of over-engineering on their parts. I think it probably would have just been smarter to have the compressor as just a single flat piece of plastic and then just have it enclosed and hollow just to make your life a little easier. I do like that we also get some seat belts. Those are always fun to have. They do the 20 millimeter rounds, or excuse me, 20 millimeter ammo belts as photo etch as well, should you choose to pose it with the gun bays open. So nicely done here for Trumpeter for the most part. Moving on to the decals. We're given a very nice big sheet of decals for giving us two different marking options, one off the Hancock and one off the Oriskany, and the Oriskany example is in the bicentennial markings. So that's a nice addition as well, just because you don't see bicentennial markings as much anymore as far as kits go, and even aftermarket decals. The rest of the stenciling is good. Colors are nice, bright, and in register. Very happy with these. These should hopefully go down without issue, other than just the issues that come with dealing with decals that are larger in size. As mentioned before, we're given two marking options in this nice colored diagram. Again, one off the Hancock and the other off the Oriskany in the bicentennial markings. Personally, I'm probably going to end up building this one. Now, moving on to the instructions. Assembly, as always with aircraft, seems to begin in the cockpit, building up the ejection seat, and before moving on to the gun bays. Now, this is where you don't technically need to fully kit these out if you're going to do them in the closed position. I would say only add the 20 millimeters just to make sure the barrels stick through correctly, and then paint the tips. After that, we then begin building up our main gear bay as for heading on to do some of the additional access areas. I would say skip these if you plan to just pose those in closed position, as I'll just save you some time. We then also add the above wing access area for then building up the engine. As I mentioned before, the photo etch is used to build up the compressor blades. This built, and this is one thing I would say I wish they had done as clear parts for the engine shroud parts, as then making this being visible would have made more sense personally, and I think aesthetically it would have looked better, but I digress. Building up the engine for buttoning it all up. Again, how much of this you really would need to do that would be visible is debatable. We then do the air inlet as well as the nose gear bay, followed by our landing gear, and then finally starting to button everything up. We then proceed to the front for building out the air-to-air weapons and their mounting pylons, choosing to do it with the refueling probe deployed, nose and radar, for doing some of the additional access areas. Again, if you're closing up the hatches, just skip a lot of that. Attaching the landing gear and air brake assemblies for heading aft to get the stabilizing stabs, and again air brake canopy for finally closing out with doing our wings. Again, this part's pretty simple. One exception being if you choose to do it with the wings folded, be aware of what parts you need to add and where. For attaching whole wing assembly, doing the air-to-ground weapons should you choose, and then attaching it to the wing. So, overall, this is definitely a kit that needs a little bit of TLC. I mean, the ejector pins throughout alone are going to eat up a lot of your time on this build. But it's one I do think if you give it the love it needs, it will definitely build up to be quite impressive. I would say if you're into naval aviation, this is one to consider. In particular, if you prefer, that 60s to 70s era of naval aviation. But it is one you're going to have to work on. So that was a look at Trumpeter's 1/32 scale F-8J Crusader. A kit that needs a little love, but if you give it, it will love you back. So, until next time.